you. Thank you, guys. I'm actually not going to start out by saying too much, but I'm going to hand over to our sponsor of today. Yeah, already, Anders, because then I'll start to talk and I'm not going to finish. So,
Okay. Better get my chance here. So I also say hello to everyone, and I say hola, señora, to you. I think you're from Spain or South America? Mexico. I just got back from Cozumel. But capiche, as some of you know, means understand. We are next door neighbor to Foo Café, and we have been the sponsor for now many years. And the reason why we are a sponsor is not that we want to buy goodwill by buying pizza. It's actually to see that we have a live forum here in Malmö where people interested in tech and design and everything surrounding software actually has a place to go with no strings attached and a various topic alternating. Has anybody heard about Capiche? No. What we do is actually helping science making understand their data easier. Many of the data systems in the world are built around traditional SQL or SQL databases where you have to join data to each other, and that makes limitations on what you can search for. You have to rebuild data. So we have a graph database making it very easy for life science companies to check all these random correlations that you might find. And I also have another function here today, and that's handing out the mic. So when Anna, if we have any questions to Anna, you can hint to me or Anna, and I will be the one delivering the mic. When you talk, and you have to have it on your chin or close to your mouth. So please ask questions. And let's hit it.
okay. Thank you. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Hey, come in. Join in. There is space up here. Nice to see some familiar faces and quite a lot of new ones, mostly new ones. Quick questions. How many designers do we have in here? Okay, there are a couple. How many are leading or managing designers of you that are here? A little bit, okay. How many come from a tech background? Okay, good. So we have a bit of a mix. This is good. This is going to be interesting. I also hope that we get the opportunity to talk to each other about that after my talk. Quick just intro to who I am. So my name is Anna. I'm the CEO and partner at the design studio called Top. My background is not from design. My background is actually from more of an entrepreneurial. I had a startup a couple of years ago and joined the design industry, if so to say, about 7 years ago. I am very passionate about seeing organizations and individuals grow. And therefore, I have, over many years, looked at, okay, how can we, with leadership, and how can we, as people supporting other people, ensure that we get the best out of everybody at the company. And part of that, working within the design industry, has been to look ahead to see, okay, where are we going? Because how do we need to evolve as designers so we can stay relevant and be able to do our passion and be creative in the long run. On the side, might be worth saying as well, I'm Michael mentioned before, I used to be on the board here. I'm on the board at Malmö Incubator called Mink, and also Fast Track Malmö, which is a capital fund for startups. So I do a little bit of that on the side, but most of my time I spend with designers, talking to design leaders all over the world, and a lot of my insights come from talking to our clients, which is a mix of AWS, Google, Samsung, Miele, and Volvo. So those are the places where, and the conversations of where I get my insights from, just so you know where everything comes from. But we're going to talk about the future of design and where it's heading. but I thought we'll start a little bit by qualifying what do I mean by design. So what I mean by design is digital design. Digital design as the design that comes from a background of more of an interaction user experience design. So that's kind of the hat we're wearing today. And over the years, or not maybe over the years, but I think it's worth saying that when we talk about design, the digital design, it's worth putting an emphasis and remembering that it was born in the digital environment. And when things are born in the digital environment, it means that they're built and acting in a context where everything is changing, as you know, with tech evolving, with customer request or becoming more digital mature, everything is in constant evolvement. So if you would compare that, for example, to let's take an easy example, bus driver who is currently driving a bus. It's not yet automated. They're still driving a bus just the same way as they did 20 years ago. So they are not in an evolving environment in the same way. And therefore, we will also see design being very different 10 years from now compared to what it's now and compared to what it was 10 years ago when I more or less entered the industry. And when I started working with design, back then we had to partly convince some of our customers or tell them what is actually design. What is it about? Why do you need it? We had to go out and sell, and not only sell it, but also inform about what is design. However, today, most people know, and I'll come back to that and tell you a little bit more why. So I'm not sure why you're here, but my hope that you're here is to get inspiration on what lays ahead and hopefully find a couple of pinpoints that you can take with you and consider when you think about what am I going to do in the future and what am I passionate about and how do I choose my path moving forward. So that's my intent with the talk. We'll see about that. I'll question all of you at the end. A little bit of background before we look ahead. This is a picture from women during the Second World War. They were, and I would say this is kind of the first phase of interaction design in some sense. Here we have people interacting with machines using data to predict weather, to know and suggest how to attack. So those are some early examples of interaction design and what that was about. Jumping ahead a little bit, in 1990s, and this is more or less when user experience as a term was coined by this guy called Donald Norman, who joined Apple as a user experience architect, and with that also started to kind of progress the industry, connecting physical, digital interactions. Some of you might remember that I've been around for a little while, or have heard stories about people working at, for example, Spotify back in 2010, where your only job was to design the play button of Spotify. And I think there are two things from here. Of course, we still need to design the play button, but this is more telling for where the industry were then, where everything was around the UI, where everything was around the specific and the details, and where you would normally work fairly siloed as a designer with a very specific thing. Jumping, or more or less the same era, I would say, and the reason for why people were actually designing only the play button was because design, if you look at it from an organizational perspective, was subordinated to everything else. So a design or a design director, if there was one, would probably be under the product ownership, or under tech or development, or potentially under R&D, but then not as an innovation driver, but more as a doer. So they didn't have any like legitimate space in the organization. Thankfully, a lot of designers were fighting and have been fighting for showing the value of design since then. And thanks to that, I would say that we also have a different, a different landscape when we look at it today compared to the past. So one of the things that if we would look at the design industry today and see where does actually design sit in the organization, what is the role, what do they do? Well, one of the things that we can see is, and I think if we look at companies like Apple, absolutely, but also companies like Pepsi and Samsung and Philips have been great at promoting design and actually bringing them to the executive table. So what does that mean, and why does it make a difference? Well, if you have a leadership team, those are normally, whether we want it or not, the ones that decide about where does the budget go, how do we work in the company. Before, designers didn't used to be in that room or at those the tables where you make decisions. Whereas today we will see a lot of companies having design directors on an executive level. That also means that we get the users and the customers in the room with designers at the table. And on top of that, of course, there are successful stories like Apple and Google and Amazon that companies around the world look at to see what do they actually do and why are they being so successful. And one of those things are design, which means that the rest of the world has to a large extent followed or tried to follow. This has, of course, resulted, and I think it's, if I would look back, maybe 5 years ago, back then I was hiring a lot of and recruiting a lot of designers in this area, in the Malmö area. There were a lot of talents out there, but it was also fairly easy to get hold on a designer. The designers back then would normally come from a digital design background, being said that they had some sort of education within UX or UI design. However, if we're looking at the market today, a lot of designers also comes from a non-design background. They might come from a business background. We will have things like business designers. We have service designers that might be more researchers than designers. They have maybe never touched a UI or UX, which means they're not used to designing for a screen, but they're still applying for a design job. We can also see that, of course, the movement and technology being one of the drivers in terms of the designer role and the collaboration between designers and tech. I think partly Agile and Lean are things and processes that are determinate some of the design process today when we look at companies. We can discuss that later, the pros and cons of that, because I think it has both. But there is definitely the kind of need, or I would say there is a need and an involvement for bridging the design and tech to a larger extent and try to find processes that today, the design processes that are today in many ways driven and steered by Agile or Lean or how companies are working internally. And fourth, fourth, I would say is, and for those of you who don't recognize this, this is a common design thinking process. A design thinking is a term that has been used, and actually, correct me here if I'm wrong, but I believe it was kind of initiated by Google as a way to work more creatively. I would say design thinking and a design thinking process are an approach for non-designers to work with design. It has a very fixed, how would you say, very fixed approach to how do you work, but it also enables more people to move into design. And that has made it possible for a lot of management consultancies to start offering design and as design thinking to different clients around the world. That being said, they don't have to come from a design background, but they can still offer design. Any questions so far? Maybe. I love questions. It's a good way to poke. You should poke. Okay, so looking ahead, I would say that I think there are three big factors that will impact how the skills, or that will impact the skill sets that are needed for designers moving ahead. And I'll talk a little bit about them. First one, automation. This one might seem very, how would you say? Well, that's very, very basic. Of course it's automation. Everything is automation nowadays. But let's dig a little bit deeper there. So 5 years ago, my designers that I used to work with, they used to do more or less wireframes from scratch. For those of you that are not familiar with what a wireframe is if you're, for example, going to design how is the Facebook app going to work, then you design, okay, this is going to be a frame, and then you add a menu and stuff like that, bit by bit. And then you can, of course, copy-paste, etc., but it was mostly done manually. Today, I don't know if any one of you in here, or how many in here are using Figma or are familiar with it? Yeah. Do you do many screens from scratch? No. Everything is in there. So just that piece, and I think it's a very small, fairly small example, but it's an example of how and where we're going when you as a designer don't need to design as much, because a lot of the things can be automated. I think if you're maybe more if you're like a graphic designer, I would probably be a little bit more nervous about my future if you're still in the graphic design industry and you're not a superstar. And the reason is because today you can go online and you can get 100 variants of a potential design profile designed by a computer, more or less, which means you don't need any manual labor. And a lot of that we're going to continue seeing also coming down to UXUI design, which means that being able to do screens super good and super fast is not going to be enough. Second thing is that there is an enormous amount of money going into digital transformation. And let's just qualify. I mean, $700 billion, that's like, okay, whatever. What is that? I don't know. How do I relate to that? It's $7 billion is the value of Apple, I think, 2 years ago. $700 billion is the amount that US spend on their defense budget every year. And why am I talking about digital transformation in the first place? Well, I'm talking about digital transformation and the amount of money going into that, because that's where a lot of the money that is coming out to design are coming from. So currently, many times when you go out and you try to sell design, and consultancies around the world trying to get money for doing projects, the money are coming from a need for the company to do digital transformation, not to design a specific product. They need to do a shift as a company, and therefore it becomes important that you can not only design the play button or not only design the app, but you also understand the tech, and you understand, okay, what are the potential business models we need here, and what are the potential logistic challenges that we will have, or third-party integrators, because that will impact a lot the success of the product and service in the end. The third factor is that, and this is, one can say, a little bit of, it can seem a little bit like unrelated to design. So let us dig here a little bit more. So up until fairly recently, there are many theories and people working with organizational development. How do we set up organizations? How do we set up leadership? How do we create efficient organizations? All of that, and to a very large extent, is based on management theories that were formed in the 1940s, 60s, where they were acting and working in a completely different world. They were not in a digital world, which means fast change from more or less day to day. They were working in industries that were fairly linear. And I mentioned before business design as one of those things that I don't know, do we have any business designers in here before? No? Maybe you know someone, maybe you've seen a little bit what they're doing, but they normally come from more of a business, sometimes a little bit financial, a little bit management background, and they come into companies partly doing business modeling, like how can we create new offerings, but they also do things like design thinking. So we have a lot of people coming from the management side stepping into design and becoming designers. Okay, so what does this mean? Let's look ahead. So I'm foreseeing more or less four changes for the years to come. Broader skill sets, birth of new specialized roles. I believe we will see more of internal designers. And I believe we will see that designers will get a bigger scene to act on. First of all, broader skill set. So, I should stand here instead so you can see the text. So first of all, I believe that, and we're partly starting to see that a little bit, that roles like UX, visual, researcher, prototypers are roles that are going to disappear. And the reason why they're going to disappear is because they're going to be replaced partly by something called full stack designer, which means that you will need to be able to have a broader skill set, because part of your previous work, as for example a visual designer, can be automated. So you don't need to do that, then you need to broaden your skill set. So we will see much more of full stack designers. The second thing I believe we will see is something called design programmer. Not a very used term, But the design programmer, I would say, come from more of the technologist background. Those are the ones that can bridge the gap between design and technology, that can understand the impact that design can have within technology and vice versa. I would say in most of organizations, they are still, no matter if you're looking at the product side or if you look at consultancies, they are divided. So you would have a team of developers, and then you would have a team of designers, and they belong to different teams and have different managers. Well, if you are going to design very, very complex systems, and we talked a little bit about this, Anders and I, before, if you have systems that are very complex, that has a lot of data, for example, then you would need someone, when designing for that, that can understand the tech, that can understand the capabilities that tech has, and the advantages that comes if you're using that in the right way. The third thing being that you will need to be able to design for complexity. So earlier designers had to design for a screen. Designers today, and I don't know if you guys who are designers in here are meeting this, but you need to, in a larger extent, relate to the data. Or maybe there are 4 different physical products that have different types of interactions, and you need to design a design system that works for all of those simultaneously. There are a lot more complexity than there used to be. You also need to know your customers. I would say one of the kind of partly trending things, but also partly maybe more of a movement is a topic called CustomerCentricity. And CustomerCentricity is more or less develop your company, set your company up in such a way, and organize your company in such a way so you put your customer at the center of what you're doing. That means that you need to understand what is the need of the users that are using the system to be able to take good decisions in your work. If you don't know their needs, then you might design the wrong thing. And then also due to a lot of automatization, there will be a bigger need for facilitators rather than creators. Because if you have technology or systems or a computer that can do most of your design, it's more about making the right choices and knowing when to pull in who and when to do what, rather than creating.
Yeah, okay. If you take away design programmer from this, isn't this sort of what a senior UX designer do today?
Good question. I would say part of it is what a senior designer, UX designer would do today. Part of it is not. I would say that there is normally, I would say, I don't know where you're working with or where you're coming from, but I would say normally when it comes to the complexity, there is not people who have practiced a lot of design within complexity. I would also say that, yes, partly people know their customer, but I think lots of designers are not practicing research and analysis and synthesizing from a perspective where they're actually able to conduct it in a good enough way. If you are eager and want to dig deeper, however, into a more of a specialized role, then I would say that virtual interaction designer is one of those things that some of you might have the opportunity already to design for it, but it's fairly unusual that we see that role being promoted or how would you say, hired for. But with more and more VR and AR, that could be a potential way of going, or how do you say, to develop your skills within. Another one I would say is algorithmic designer, being able to design systems that change a lot during the way, or designing systems that are designing themselves. And thirdly, and this is the picture here comes from a Malmö startup called Marble. They do virtual cards where each card has different types of design based on the data that's behind it. So the data automatically generates a pattern based on the information on the card. And the third thing being AI designers. So with more and more involvement within that, we will also need more designers to be able to design. And I think especially here you would need more of tech skills, but also a lot of ethical skills to be able to navigate how do we actually create systems that work in the way we want them in the long run. The third thing that I believe we're going to see more of, and if the other two are already roles that we're seeing or starting to see on the market, this one is more of an, I would say, undesigned roles as of now, and those are more of the kind of internal designers. And when I say internal designers, I mean designers that will work with, for example, HR, designing great HR experiences or employer experiences, or people who can design organizations, or people who are design strategists that comes from more or less different or very, very different backgrounds than we have today. So they will potentially come from HR, for example, but you add a design layer to it. Or they will come from a business or a financial background, but you will add a design layer to it. So just in the same way as we today have internal managers or internal team leaders, I believe we will also see internal designers within all different functions. And the fourth thing being that I believe that designers are gonna get, because the industry is growing, because the roles are growing, because of the skill sets are being combined in new and different ways, we are gonna see much more of freelance designers. It will be more important for companies to be able to scale up and down, to bring in a HR designer for a couple of months and then not have it anymore and so on. So I believe we're going to see much more of a growth there, because there will be more designers and because there will be more requests. I believe we're also going to see more of the kind of superstar designers. And the superstar designers, I think this is Jennifer Bow. She's currently UX and product designers at Salesforce. Being said, one of the biggest business-to-business companies in the world that are, I don't even know their worth, a lot. They are influencing the business-to-business industry to a super large extent. Hardly anyone knows who she is, which is pretty impressive, or pretty, I don't know if, no, not impressive. I would say the other way around. It's pretty remarkable that she is so unknown. Yes. Oh, that I don't know. But I think designers are gonna play another. I'm not from the tech, so I'll flag that one. But I believe that we're gonna see more of designers being promoted to a larger extent within media, within business media, but also in general. What? I think first of all, working, she's been in the design industry for quite a bit. She's also a woman in the US, trying or getting design in at that executive level within a company that's driven by primarily business and is a business to business company, not a business to consumer company, which are where you will find more of the prominent design directors, I would say. Just to kind of round off, and then we can take some questions. But I believe we're gonna see new types of designers everywhere. I believe that if you're designer or leading designers, I think you have probably one of the most amazing jobs and one of the most exciting futures, because there will be so many different things you can specialize on and go into. And I think you will be able to combine different types of passions and interests to a much larger extent than what we've seen up until now. You don't need to be excited about screens or apps to be a designer in the future. You can be excited about people, and you can be excited about tech, and you can be excited about organizations and still be a designer. So I think there is a large room for creating, or for kind of combining the creativeness with something else. Moving ahead, I kind of like this quote. This is by Tim Brown, who is one of the founders for IDEO, which is one of the if you look in the design industry, I would say it's one of the bigger and better design agencies out there, and agency that has been pushing things forward for many, many years. He says that CEOs will need to be designers in order to be successful in the future. And I think that is a good reminder for everybody out there that don't understand design. For all of you that understand design and are already sold on design, you probably don't need that quote. I'll share my presentation after. I've also added a couple of reflection questions if you want something to bring with you and think around or use for your design team. Yeah, that was that. Do we have any questions? Yes.
It sounds very scary when you say that a lot of these professions are going to disappear, like for example UX designer and all that. And my question to you is, how do you think that companies are going to keep up with this evolvement? Do you think that they're going to offer training for their employees that they have right now, or are they going to be laid off, or how do you see it happening?
Good question. I think the answer is complex. There is not one answer, but I think in general you will need to push for your future yourself partly. I think there will be more of external forces that will start shaping the industry. I think the universities and the schools are going to be the ones that are the front runners for what's out there, in addition to what you yourself as a driven designer can do, or if you have a good manager. But I would say if you're at a bigger company, you're probably not going to get that. Maybe if you're at consultancy though, because they want to be where the money is, they want to be one step ahead, and I think those will be also the ones that are pushing it more.
Thank you.
Which skills do you which skills do you think are most important to be most hireable as a designer?
I think you will be most hireable if you are doing something you enjoy. That's my simple question, or a simple answer, but in combination with being flexible and agile. Because I think if you have a very fixed mindset of what you are and what you're doing, you will need to find a role that kind of suits that now. But that also means that you might be trapped in something that might not be relevant in a couple of years from now.
Do you see a future where there's more design companies that are helping other companies, or big companies hiring designers?
Bigger companies hiring, you mean hiring them in-house?
Yeah.
So I mean, I would say partly the tendency that we're starting to see in the market is more of freelancers. And I think that will also hit the design industry, because having people employed is expensive. So I think that will have a big impact. But I think in combination with and I think if you're in a specialized role, as long as it's not a continuous specialization for the company, I think you will be more of a freelancer going to different places. So I think it will depend on your role, and it would also depend a little bit on what the company needs. But currently, for example, if we take a local big furniture company, they are kind of scraping the market for designers. And I would say they're scraping the market for designers that are more of UX designers. I think that type of initiatives we're absolutely going to see, but I think we are more going to see a more diverse set of designers within the companies in the future. Any questions from online? No?
Yeah, this is a general question for me.
Yeah.
You said that algorithms and AI is something that we have to take in consideration when we design. If we turn it the other way around, how is the AI today in designing things? Like, if you have so much data on how people behave and interact with computers, shouldn't AI soon be better to define what colors we like and where things should be positioned? Or do you see AI as a threat to design itself?
I don't see it as a threat,
No?
because I don't really believe in the term threat like
No,
that.
no, no.
But I definitely
Possibility.
see it, but I definitely see it as a thing that's pushing things forward, and which means that your role will change. So I can give you one example. One of my colleagues and partners, Oscar, has been in the design industry for, I don't know, over 25 years, which is long for being working with like UI and digital design. He has designed a lot of operative systems over the years. His skills, that being said, the core of what he is amazing at are not going to be used, or they are not going to be needed moving ahead. That being said, he's super fast at crunching out different variations of visual design and concepting that. That's not going to be used in that extent. I think what will be used, though, is his gut feeling, which is based on experience and creativity. That will be used. And having the ability to take decisions that are more complex, that are going to be used. But part of it, no. So, yeah. and it is partly scary, but I mean, it's also, I think, for all of us working with digital in some sense, that's also the world we have bought into, going into it, I would say. Or if we haven't, I think it's time to consider buying into it or changing environment, because the changes are going to come no matter if you want it or not. So, yes.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. Curious to know your perspective on the role of designers as facilitators inside organization. Because, for example, I see that there is a growing trends like design sprints, where designers are actually bringing different stakeholders together to solve business challenges. So historically, it was considered that designers are the ones who are creative, that they coming up with new ideas. But based on, for some design sprint, creative ideas can come from anyone.
Yeah.
But someone has actually to facilitate this process to basically and keep it all together.
Yeah. Sorry, the question.
Yeah, your perspective on designers, role of designers as facilitators.
Okay. So I think coming up with ideas and coming up with creative or good ideas, I would say is not necessarily not the problem in any organization. Most organizations have enough smart people to come up with creative ideas. I think the role of the designer comes in, and I think this is the difference of a designer that is a trained designer and a non-designer. And I also say I've been working with design and developing ideas for a long time. The work I can do compared to the designers that I work with is vastly different. Because what they can do is they can take all of those ideas and iterate them and refine them and come up with new things. You cannot do that, or most people cannot do that if you're not a trained designer or creative. Because then you will have more of a linear approach where you will evolve the things or the ideas that you have from the start. And I believe that's also where the role of the designer with the complexity becomes important, because then you can take different bits and pieces and combine them together and create something that's valuable for the users in the end, which is I would say pretty challenging work and a pretty challenging jump to go from an idea to there. So yes, everybody can be creative, but I don't think everybody can create a good product or service or experience. Pizza. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thanks for all the questions.